In tonight's episode, we are diving into two chilling stories from Asia. Both are whispered about on travel forums and passed along like dark secrets. And one of them takes us straight into the beating heart of Bangkok, inside a hotel that looks ordinary from the street, but has a reputation that makes seasoned travelers hesitate before booking a room. This is the Asia Hotel. To most, it is a towering landmark close to the SkyTrain, a place buzzing with tourists and business travelers. But in the older wing of the building, behind certain doors, something else is said to linger. Guests describe strange sounds, icy blasts of air, and the feeling of being watched. But nothing unsettles people more than what hides in the mirrors. One Singaporean businessman checking into the 7th floor thought nothing of it at first. He had his routine: a shower, a towel, the quiet humming of the bathroom fan. But as he dried his hair and casually glanced toward the mirror, his stomach dropped, because reflected back at him was not just his own image. Sitting neatly on the bed behind him, staring directly into the glass, was the pale figure of a young girl. When he turned around, the bed was empty. Yet in the mirror, she stayed. The story begins with a man who was no stranger to hotels. He was a Singaporean businessman, traveling constantly across Asia, always jumping from one city to the next. Bangkok was a regular stop on his schedule. He knew the airports, the taxis, the traffic, and of course the endless choice of hotels. But on this trip, something nudged him toward the Asia Hotel. Maybe it was convenience. Maybe it was price. Maybe it was chance. Whatever it was, he booked the room without giving it much thought. When he arrived, the lobby looked like any other bustling Bangkok hotel. Polished floors reflected the warm glow of chandeliers. The sound of rolling luggage echoed through the space. Tourists gathered in clusters, checking maps, snapping photos, laughing over inside jokes. It seemed normal, safe, even welcoming. But as he walked toward the reception desk, he noticed something subtle. The staff smiled, polite and professional, yet their eyes darted ever so slightly when they assigned him his room. 7th floor. An older wing of the hotel. He caught it only for a second, but it lingered in his mind. He shrugged it off, collecting his key card and making his way to the elevators. The ride up was quiet, the mirrored walls reflecting his tired expression back at him. The higher the elevator climbed, the emptier it felt. When the doors slid open onto the 7th floor, he stepped into a corridor that immediately felt different from the cheerful chaos below. The lighting was dimmer, softer, almost too soft. The carpet muffled his footsteps, swallowing sound until the hallway felt like a vacuum. Each door he passed was closed tight, with brass numbers that had lost their shine. Finally, he reached his room. Sliding the key card into the lock, the door clicked open with a sound that felt louder than it should have. The air inside greeted him like a wall, cooler than expected, almost damp. The curtains were drawn, letting in only the faintest glow of Bangkok's neon skyline. For a moment he stood in the doorway, taking it in. A simple bed, a desk with a chair, a television mounted on the wall, and across from the bed, a wide mirror stretching nearly floor to ceiling. He tossed his bag on the chair and sat down on the edge of the bed, exhaling a long sigh. Just another business trip. Just another night in another hotel. He told himself that, but the silence in the room pressed on him, heavy and unnatural. Usually hotels carried the faint hum of life, doors opening, showers running, muffled voices through the walls. Here there was nothing. Only his own breath. As he unpacked, he reached for a small chain he always carried with him. A Buddha pendant, worn around his neck since he was young. His mother had given it to him, saying it would keep him safe in places where people were not alone, even when they thought they were. He slipped it on like he always did. Habit. Protection. A small comfort in a strange city. Settling in, he decided to freshen up before heading out for dinner. The bathroom lights flickered briefly as he switched them on. The mirror above the sink reflected his tired face, shadows stretching beneath his eyes. He turned on the shower, steam filling the small space, and let the water wash away the fatigue of travel. Everything seemed ordinary, almost too ordinary, but when he stepped out, toweling his hair dry, the air in the room beyond seemed colder than before. The drawn curtains barely stirred, yet he felt a draft. He paused, standing barefoot on the bathroom tile, staring at the darkened outline of the bed through the open door. Something about the room felt occupied. Still, he told himself, it was exhaustion. A trick of the mind. After all, he had stayed in dozens of hotels before, but he could not shake the sensation that this one was different, and that somewhere inside those walls unseen eyes were already watching him. The businessman tried to settle into the rhythm of his stay. After all, it was just another night before meetings in the morning. He unpacked his shirts, placed his documents on the desk, and turned on the television for background noise. The flickering light filled the room, but even that seemed to do little against the strange weight in the air. The sound from the TV was faint, like it was struggling to reach his ears. He picked up the remote and raised the volume. Still muffled, almost distant. He frowned, switching the channel. The same. Clear picture. But the audio felt like it was coming through a wall. He let it run anyway, telling himself it was just the old wiring in this wing of the hotel. Bangkok was full of quirks like that. No reason to dwell on it. Yet the silence behind the sound unsettled him. It was as though the room itself swallowed every other trace of life. Trying to distract himself, he decided to order food. He picked up the phone, pressed the button for room service, and waited. The line clicked once, static. Then, faint breathing. He froze. The receiver pressed against his ear. "Hello?" he said, trying again. The static grew sharper, the faint sound of someone exhaling directly into the line. A second later, the connection cut. No tone, no voice, nothing. He stared at the receiver for a long moment before carefully setting it back in place. His hand went instinctively to the Buddha pendant at his chest. He rubbed it between his fingers, the cool surface grounding him. He told himself, the call was just a glitch. Hotels had technical issues all the time, but deep down, he felt something deliberate in that silence, as if someone had been on the other end, listening. Shaking off the unease, he decided to freshen up again before going out. He stepped into the bathroom, flipping the switch. The lights buzzed, then steadied. He stood in front of the sink, running water into his hands, splashing his face. And then, out of the corner of his eye, he noticed something strange. The mirror. It reflected the bathroom perfectly, except for one detail. In the glass, the bathroom door behind him was slightly ajar. He turned immediately. The door stood closed, just as he had left it. He glanced back at the mirror, still ajar. He stared for a long moment, his breath slowing, his pulse beating louder in his ears. He forced himself to look away, twisting the knob to open the door, stepping out into the room. Nothing. The curtains remained drawn, the bed untouched, the silence absolute. Returning to the bathroom, he looked once more. The reflection now matched. The door was closed, just as it should be. He let out a breath he hadn't realized he'd been holding, gripping the sink until his knuckles whitened. Fatigue, he thought. Just fatigue. Long flights, little sleep, and too much imagination. But the unease clung to him. It followed him as he dressed, buttoning his shirt, adjusting his tie. Every time he caught his reflection in the tall mirror across from the bed, he felt a pull. His eyes searched the background, scanning for something that wasn't there. Or maybe something that was. He sat down on the edge of the bed, staring at the mirror. For a moment, he thought he saw movement in the corner of the reflection. A flicker, like fabric shifting. He turned his head quickly. Nothing. just the stillness of his room. He looked back into the glass, empty. The clock on the nightstand ticked faintly, marking the seconds as the weight in the room grew heavier. He could no longer shake the sense that he was not the only one inside. The pendant around his neck felt strangely warm, almost buzzing against his skin. He touched it again, rubbing it between his thumb and forefinger. And then came the sound. Soft at first, a faint dripping, like water hitting tile. He looked toward the bathroom. The sink was off. The shower was dry. Yet the sound persisted, echoing faintly as though from the walls themselves. Drip, drip, drip. He stood, uneasy, stepping slowly toward the bathroom. Each step felt heavy, deliberate. The dripping grew louder as he approached, yet when he flicked the switch, the bathroom was bone dry. No puddle, no droplets, nothing to explain it. He stepped back out, closing the door behind him. When he turned again toward the mirror by the bed, his breath caught. The reflection showed something he couldn't deny this time. On the edge of the mattress, barely visible at first, sat the faint outline of a figure, small, childlike, motionless. He spun around. The bed was empty, sheets smooth, untouched. He turned back to the glass. She was gone. Only his own pale reflection stared back. A chill spread across his skin, each hair standing on end. He no longer felt tired. He no longer felt safe. For the first time in years of constant travel, the businessman realized he might have stepped into a place where routine could not protect him. Something inside this hotel was watching, and it had already chosen to show itself. The businessman left the room that evening, determined to distract himself with the noise of the city. Bangkok was always alive at night, and he hoped the crowds, the lights, and the food would help push away the unease of that room. Yet, even as he walked through the hotel lobby, he couldn't help but glance back toward the elevators, half expecting to see someone, or something, step out behind him. When he returned hours later, the building was quieter. The lobby still glowed, but most guests had retreated to their rooms. He noticed the receptionist glance up as he walked past, her smile faltering for just a moment before she looked away. It was quick, almost dismissive, but it unsettled him. As if she knew something he didn't. As if his presence on the 7th floor was not entirely his choice. The elevator ride back was painfully slow. Each floor ticked past with a dull chime. By the time the doors slid open, the corridor was darker than he remembered. A single light near the far end flickered, buzzing faintly like an insect caught inside. The air felt heavier up here, pressing down with a chill that had not been present downstairs. He inserted the card into his door and stepped inside. Everything looked the same. The curtains were still drawn, the bed neatly made, his belongings undisturbed. Yet the moment he closed the door, he sensed it, the same cold, unseen presence waiting inside. He tried to shake it off, setting his phone on the desk, but the silence had returned. Not just quiet, hollow, suffocating silence that made even his breathing sound too loud. He turned on the television again. This time, the screen refused to respond. Black. No sound, no picture, only his own reflection staring faintly in the glass. He pressed the buttons harder, frustration creeping in, but nothing changed. Finally, he gave up and dropped the remote onto the desk with a sharp clatter. The sound echoed too long, bouncing unnaturally across the walls before dying out. That was when he heard it again. The dripping. Except now it wasn't coming from the bathroom. It was coming from behind the mirror on the far wall. Steady, deliberate, like water hitting the surface of glass, he froze, staring at the mirror. Each drop sounded closer, sharper, as though it were building into something more. Unable to look away, he stepped forward cautiously. His reflection moved with him, pale and tense. For a moment, everything was still. And then, just for a fraction of a second, he saw her. A young girl, sitting cross-legged on the bed behind him. Her face was blurred, her hair falling in strands across her cheeks. She wasn't looking at him. She was looking down, as if waiting. He spun around. The bed was empty. Again. When he turned back, the mirror showed only himself. His stomach twisted, and he gripped the pendant around his neck, pressing it hard against his chest. The knock on the door broke the silence. Sharp, 3 raps, echoing down the hall. He jumped, his breath catching. For a moment he hesitated, but curiosity pulled him forward. He opened the door just a crack. A hotel staff member stood there, a woman in housekeeping uniform clutching a bundle of fresh towels, but she didn't offer them. Instead, she leaned closer, her voice low, urgent. "Do not leave the mirror uncovered," she whispered in Thai, accented English. Her eyes darted toward the room behind him, wide with something like fear. Before he could respond, she pressed the towels into his arms, turned, and hurried away down the corridor. He stood frozen in the doorway, the towels heavy in his grip. When he glanced back into the room, the mirror dominated his vision. Large, spotless, reflecting every shadow. His pulse quickened. Cover it. Why? What did she mean? He closed the door and locked it, sliding the chain into place. He tossed the towels on the bed, his mind racing. The dripping had stopped. The silence returned, thicker than before. Trying to calm himself, he pulled the curtain aside to look out at the city. Neon lights painted the skyline in red and gold. Cars moved like streams of fireflies below. Yet, even here, with the city alive beneath him, he could see his reflection in the glass. And there, for just a split second, a second figure standing over his shoulder. He staggered back, yanking the curtain shut. His chest heaved with ragged breaths. The warning echoed in his mind. Do not leave the mirror uncovered. Now every glance, every movement, every breath felt watched. He couldn't tell if the danger was in the room itself, or waiting inside the reflection, ready to pull him in. He could not sleep. No matter how tightly he pulled the sheets around himself, no matter how many times he turned off the lamp and then flicked it back on, the room refused to feel like a safe place. His mind replayed the woman's words again and again, like a broken record. Do not leave the mirror uncovered. The phrase crawled across his skin. It wasn't advice. It had sounded like a warning. The mirror loomed across from the bed, vast and spotless, reflecting him every time he dared to look up. He tried turning his back to it, but he felt its weight pressing down on him like an eye that never blinked. His pendant dangled against his chest, and for the first time in years, he found himself holding it as if his life depended on it. The air grew colder. It began with a subtle shift, a faint draft that brushed against his bare arms. Within minutes, the temperature had dropped so sharply that he could see his own breath in the dim light. He shivered, pulling the blanket tighter. Then came the sound, not dripping this time, but whispering. Low, drawn-out syllables, impossible to decipher, rising and falling like breath against glass. His eyes darted toward the mirror. At first it was empty, just his reflection huddled on the bed. But slowly, too slowly, the shadows behind him thickened. Shapes gathered in the reflection, growing clearer, more defined. A small figure perched at the edge of the bed. The same girl, her head tilted downward, strands of black hair masking her face. His chest tightened. He spun around. The bed was empty, as always. Yet when he turned back to the glass, she remained. And this time, she moved. Her head lifted with a jerking motion, hair sliding away to reveal pale skin and hollow eyes too dark to be natural. They locked with his, not through the room, but through the reflection itself. She was not looking at him, she was looking into him. He stumbled backward, colliding with the nightstand. The lamp toppled, clattering to the floor and shattering the bulb. Darkness swallowed the room, leaving only the glow of the city seeping through the curtains. And in the fractured light, the mirror seemed to pulse with movement. More shapes emerged, hands pressing against the inside of the glass, leaving smudges that vanished as quickly as they formed. Whispers rose into a chorus, overlapping, urgent, like a crowd speaking from the other side of a wall. The businessman clutched his pendant, but a sharp pain stabbed his chest. The chain snapped suddenly, the pendant falling into his lap. He froze, staring down at it. The thin cord had split cleanly in half. No reason, no force, just broken. His throat tightened. That pendant had survived years of wear, endless travel. His mother's blessing was supposed to be unbreakable. But in this room, it had failed. He scrambled to his feet, heart pounding, sweat dripping down his temples despite the icy air. The mirror rippled as though it were filled with water. The girl's figure grew sharper, her small frame rising to stand on the reflection of the bed. Her lips moved, but no sound reached him. Only the chorus of voices grew louder, filling his skull until he wanted to scream. He grabbed one of the towels from the bundle the housekeeper had given him. Desperation guided him as he threw it over the mirror. For a moment, the reflection vanished, hidden beneath the fabric. Silence crashed into the room, deafening, as though cutting off a scream mid-breath. He stood there, panting, waiting. Nothing, no whispers, no rippling glass, just silence. His shoulders slumped with relief, trembling hands brushing over his face. He almost laughed, a broken sound, relief and fear tangled together. Maybe that was it. Maybe the warning had been true. Then the towel shifted. Slowly, almost deliberately, it began to slide down the surface of the mirror. He lunged forward, pressing it back in place, holding it tight against the glass. His palms burned with cold. Beneath the towel, something pressed outward, small fingers, 5 of them, pushing against the fabric from the other side. He stumbled back, leaving the towel to sag loose. The impression of a child's hand remained, imprinting against the cloth, moving, dragging downward. The whispers returned, louder now, no longer muffled. His chest heaved, panic rising to a breaking point. He grabbed the edge of the curtain and yanked it open, desperate for light. Neon spilled into the room, flooding the space with garish color. But even in the glow, the mirror seemed darker than the rest of the room, its covered surface pulsing like a heartbeat. The towel fell to the floor. The girl was still there, clearer than ever, standing in the reflection, her face now fully revealed, hollow eyes, mouth slightly open, as if caught mid-breath. And though she did not move in the real room, her reflection stepped closer, one pace, then another. She was crossing the distance between the mirror and the bed with slow, deliberate steps. The businessman's throat went dry. His voice caught, but no words came out. He backed away until his shoulders pressed against the wall. The mirror filled his vision, swallowing everything else. The girl reached the inside edge of the glass and raised her hand. The surface rippled beneath her fingers, and for the first time, the sound of nails scraping glass pierced the air. The pendant on the bed gleamed faintly, fractured and broken. He wanted to reach for it, to clutch it, to beg for protection, but his body refused to move. His legs were heavy, locked in place. All he could do was watch as the girl leaned forward, her face pressing against the glass, her hollow eyes inches from his own. The whispers cut off. Silence fell, and then, in a voice sharp and clear, echoing directly from the mirror, she spoke a single word. "Stay." The silence that followed the single word was unbearable. The businessman stood frozen, his body stiff, lungs burning from shallow breaths. The girl's face lingered against the glass, her hollow eyes boring into his. The word echoed in his head, over and over, as if it hadn't come from the outside at all, but from somewhere deep inside his own thoughts. Stay, and then, without warning, she was gone. The mirror reflected only him again, shaking, pale, clutching the wall as if it might collapse beneath him. His legs buckled and he sank to the edge of the bed, head in his hands. He told himself he had imagined it. A hallucination brought on by stress, exhaustion, and too many stories from the internet. But his pendant, broken and useless, gleamed up at him from the sheets. That was real. The girl's handprint smudged faintly across the mirror's surface. That was real. He couldn't stay here. He had to leave. He fumbled for his phone, intending to call the front desk, demand another room, anything. But when the screen lit up, the battery icon showed a perfect charge, yet no signal, no bars, no connection. As if the room itself refused to let him reach the outside world. A soft knock interrupted his thoughts. He froze, staring at the door. Another knock. Quiet, deliberate. He forced himself to stand, legs trembling, and approached. He pressed his eye against the peephole. The housekeeper from before stood in the corridor. Same uniform, same tired expression. Except now, her face looked pale, almost sickly under the hallway lights. She glanced up at the peephole directly, as though she knew he was watching, and gestured quickly for him to open. Against every instinct screaming at him, he unlatched the chain and cracked the door. She pushed her way inside immediately, closing the door behind her. "You saw her, didn't you?" she whispered, her voice harsh, as though afraid the walls might be listening. He couldn't respond, his throat dry, but his silence was enough of an answer. She moved past him, her eyes fixed on the mirror. "7th floor," she muttered, shaking her head. "Always the 7th floor. Oh," the businessman finally found his voice. "What is this? Who is she?" The woman's gaze never left the mirror. "Years ago, a girl died here. Some say she was the daughter of a guest. Others claim she was a runaway, hiding in the old wing. She never checked out. They found her in one of these rooms, sitting by the mirror, staring. No one knows how long she had been there. Her reflection stayed, even after she was gone." The businessman's chest tightened, the whispers, the dripping, the shadowed figure, all of it suddenly connected. His stomach turned. "Why me?" The woman's eyes finally flicked toward him, her expression grim. "Because you looked. That's how she finds them. Most people never notice. They go about their business, sleep through the night, and leave with nothing but strange dreams. But if you meet her eyes in the mirror, she follows." The businessman staggered back, his hand instinctively reaching for the broken pendant on the bed. The woman's gaze fell to it, and her face darkened further. "Even that couldn't protect you? Then she's already chosen you." The air grew colder again, the temperature plummeting until the woman's breath fogged in front of her. She crossed herself quickly, clutching the towels she had given him earlier. "That's why I told you to cover it. If the mirror sees you, she sees you. And if she sees you long enough," she stopped, biting her lip, "she won't let you leave." The businessman's heart hammered in his chest. He looked at the mirror again, half expecting her face to return, pressed against the glass. But for now, it showed only his own distorted reflection, trembling and pale. "So what do I do?" he asked, his voice cracking. The housekeeper didn't answer right away. She knelt, picking up the pendant from the sheets, turning it over in her hand. The cord was split perfectly, as though sliced clean. She looked up at him, eyes filled with pity. "She breaks protections. She breaks prayers. There's only one thing left to do." "What?" His voice was barely a whisper. The woman's eyes flicked toward the door. Leave before dawn. If you stay until morning, she won't just haunt the mirror, she'll step through. The businessman's breath caught. Leave before dawn. The words rang like a sentence. His instincts screamed to run immediately, to leave everything behind. Yet something held him in place. A pull, heavy and cold, rooted in the pit of his stomach. He realized with dawning horror that he didn't just feel the girl watching him anymore. He felt her waiting. The housekeeper stepped closer, lowering her voice to almost nothing. If she calls again, do not answer. No matter what you hear, do not look. A low creak echoed through the room. Both of them turned. The mirror rippled faintly, as though stirred by invisible hands. And then, from deep within the glass, came the sound of faint, muffled crying. The sobs of a child, distant yet clear enough to twist his gut. The housekeeper grabbed his arm. Do you understand me? Do not answer her. But his eyes were already drawn back to the mirror, to the shifting shadows beyond the glass. The crying grew louder, raw and desperate. Each sob carried with it a strange, unnatural weight, like it wasn't just sound but an invitation. And for the first time, he wondered if leaving would even matter, because the girl in the mirror wasn't just haunting the 7th floor, she was waiting for him specifically, and he had already been marked. The crying from the mirror grew sharper, each sob slicing through the air until it felt unbearable. The businessman clamped his hands over his ears, but the sound wasn't coming from outside. It was inside his head, vibrating through his skull. The housekeeper shouted at him to look away, to keep his eyes down, but something stronger pulled at him, a cold magnetism that refused to let go. He risked a glance. Just one. The girl was there again, closer than ever. Her face pressed so hard against the glass that her skin seemed to flatten, her hollow eyes wide, unblinking. Her mouth trembled as she whispered a word he couldn't quite hear. It wasn't stay this time. It was something else, something that sounded almost like his name. The housekeeper grabbed his arm, yanking him toward the door. Now, she hissed. Before she crosses. Her voice cracked with fear. He stumbled after her, his legs weak, his chest burning. They threw open the door, the dim corridor stretching ahead like a lifeline. But as they fled, he risked one final glance over his shoulder. The mirror, half hidden by the open door, no longer showed the room. It showed the hallway. And in that reflection, he saw himself running. But he was not alone. The girl was right behind him, her pale hand reaching forward, inches from his back. He froze, his stomach dropping, but the housekeeper shoved him forward, forcing him into the elevator. The doors slammed shut. Silence. When they opened again, the lobby glowed with warm, ordinary light. Tourists milled about. Luggage wheels clattered on polished floors. The world looked normal again. Yet, as he staggered toward the exit, drenched in cold sweat, he felt the weight of her still clinging to him. The broken pendant burned cold in his palm, and in the gleam of the polished marble floor, he swore he saw her faint reflection standing at his side, waiting. He left the hotel that night and never returned. But on forums, in hushed threads and whispered reviews, others still speak of the 7th floor, the mirrors, the crying, and the guests who left, only to wonder if they truly left alone. 2 stories, 2 places, both different, yet bound by the same unsettling truth that some buildings never truly empty themselves of the people who once lingered inside. The Asia Hotel in Bangkok hides its ghost in polished mirrors, waiting for travelers to glance too long. But across the sea in Brunei, the danger is not subtle at all. On Tanglin Hill stands a hostel so drenched in fear that locals refuse to step inside after sunset. Where the hotel whispers, the hostel roars. Where one spirit waits to be noticed, the other lashes out at anyone foolish enough to enter. If the first story was about a ghost that clings to reflections, The second is about a spirit that clings to you. And once it finds you, leaving is never that simple. Tanglin Hill sits on the edge of Brunei, a slope of tangled trees and overgrown paths that locals avoid once the sun dips low. The air there is heavy, and the silence has its own weight, broken only by the rustle of leaves and the call of distant insects. At the top of the hill rests what is left of the Tanglin Hill Hostel, a place abandoned for decades, but never forgotten. Its walls are stained with age, its windows broken into jagged teeth, and its corridors choked with dust and shadows. To the curious, it is a relic worth exploring. To those who know its history, it is a cage for something restless. The main character of this story is not a guest or a passerby, but an explorer, a man from the city armed with nothing more than a flashlight, a camera, and the thrill of chasing the unknown. He had heard stories of the hostel whispered online, tales of people who entered and left with more than fear. Some spoke of sickness that followed them for weeks, others of dreams where a presence pressed against their chest until they woke gasping. Most brushed it off as superstition. He wanted proof, something he could capture and show the world. The climb to the hostel was already unsettling. The narrow path up Tanglin Hill twisted under his feet, roots reaching like hands through the dirt. The deeper he went, the quieter it became. Even the wind seemed to fall away, leaving him surrounded by stillness so complete it pressed against his ears. By the time he reached the clearing where the hostel stood, the sun was sinking fast. The building rose like a dark skeleton, its roof sagging, its walls streaked with black moss. It was less a structure than a husk, yet the moment he laid eyes on it, he felt something strange, like the hostel was staring back. He paused at the entrance. The main doors had long since fallen apart, leaving only a gaping frame. Beyond, the corridor stretched into darkness, each step forward swallowed by shadow. He lifted his flashlight, its weak beam trembling across graffiti, peeling paint, and broken furniture. The smell was sharp, damp, tinged with something metallic beneath the rot. He stepped inside, camera rolling, whispering notes for himself about the decayed state of the place. But the longer he spoke, the more he realized his own voice sounded wrong, too loud, bouncing back off the walls in delayed echoes that didn't quite match. The deeper he went, the more the atmosphere thickened. His flashlight beam caught fractured glass scattered across the floor, shattered windows that framed only the thick darkness of the jungle outside. Once, this had been a hostel filled with chatter, footsteps, and life. Now, it was a hollow shell. Yet as he stood there, he swore he could almost hear it, the faint shuffle of feet above him, as though someone still walked the long abandoned halls. His purpose was clear: to capture proof, to peel back the veil of rumor and superstition, but with every step, doubt crept in. The silence wasn't natural. It wasn't the silence of emptiness, but of something holding its breath, watching, waiting. By the time he reached the first staircase, his excitement had dulled into unease. The steps before him were littered with debris, but it wasn't the sight of crumbled plaster that made him hesitate. It was the sensation that climbing higher meant entering a space he was not supposed to touch. Still, he adjusted his grip on the flashlight and began to ascend, each creak of the wooden boards echoing louder than the last. He had come for a story, but the hostel had its own, and it was ready to tell it. The staircase groaned under his weight, each step a protest that echoed through the hollow building. His flashlight wavered across the walls, catching patches of graffiti scrawled in languages he didn't recognize. Some were childish drawings, others were strange symbols etched deep into the plaster as though carved by desperate hands. He muttered to himself, recording the details for his camera, trying to keep his voice steady, but the sound bounced back strangely, delayed, as if the walls themselves were repeating his words in a whisper. At the top of the staircase, the corridor stretched long and narrow, the air noticeably colder. His breath fogged faintly in the beam of his flashlight, though outside it was still humid and warm. He tried to laugh it off, whispering into the camera that old buildings always carried strange drafts. But in his chest, unease settled like a stone. He began down the hallway, the crunch of broken glass and plaster beneath his boots, his only company. Or so he thought. Halfway down, he stopped suddenly, freezing in place. Another sound joined his own footsteps, lighter, quicker, like bare feet slapping softly against the concrete, keeping pace just behind him. He swung his flashlight around, the beam slicing through dust and shadow. Nothing. The corridor stretched empty, silent, the air thick and unmoving. His heart pounded in his ears. He waited, straining for another sound. At first, nothing came. Then, faintly, from somewhere deeper in the building, came the unmistakable echo of a door slamming shut. The noise reverberated through the hostel, rattling through the broken glass in the window frames. He jumped, nearly dropping his camera. The building had no working doors. He had seen it himself. And yet, the sound was unmistakable, too sharp to be explained by wind or collapsing wood. He steadied his breathing, forcing a shaky laugh into the microphone. "Guess I'm not alone in here after all," he whispered, though his attempt at humor fell flat even to his own ears. He pressed forward, determined not to back down. The deeper he went, the more the hallway seemed to press in around him. At the end of the corridor, he found a large common room. The floor was littered with debris, old mattresses shredded and piled against the corners, their springs jutting out like rusted bones. He swept his flashlight across the walls, revealing long streaks of dark stains running downward. At first, he thought it was water damage, but the longer he stared, the more it looked like something else. The streaks were too thick, too deliberate, like something had been dragged across the walls by hand. He stepped carefully inside, panning his camera across the room, and that was when it happened. A sudden, loud bang erupted just behind him, sharp and violent, as if something heavy had crashed against the wall. He spun around, flashlight jerking wildly. Nothing. The corridor behind him was empty, silent once again. His breath came quick, shallow. He forced himself to speak into the camera. Some kind of animal, maybe, or falling debris. But even as he said it, the words felt like lies. Then came the whisper, a soft, low murmur, so faint he thought, at first it was just the wind threading through the cracks in the walls. But it grew clearer, syllables forming, rising and falling, in a language he didn't understand. The sound seemed to come from everywhere at once, behind him, above him, inside the very air he breathed. His knees locked, his skin prickled. He swept the flashlight wildly, but no figure revealed itself. Just the empty room, the broken furniture, the stains on the wall. Yet the whisper carried with it a weight, a presence that pressed down on him until his chest felt tight, each breath a battle. He stumbled backward, colliding with a splintered table, his camera shaking in his hands. "Hello?" he called out, his voice cracking. The whisper fell silent at once, cut off as though someone had clamped a hand over its mouth. The stillness that followed was worse than the sound. It was absolute, unyielding, as if the entire building had turned its attention to him, waiting for his next move. And then, in the silence, his flashlight flickered. Once, twice, before steadying again. The beam now fell on the far corner of the room, and there, half hidden in shadow, stood a shape, motionless, watching. He froze, every instinct screaming at him to run. But when he blinked, the shape was gone, leaving only the dark and the weight of something unseen pressing closer. Whatever lingered in this hostel wasn't content with being ignored. It had made itself known, and it wasn't finished. The explorer stood frozen in the common room, the beam of his flashlight trembling against cracked walls. The shadow he had seen in the corner still burned in his mind, though the space was empty now. His heart pounded in his chest, each thud a reminder that he was no longer just documenting ruins. Something in this hostel was watching, and it had chosen to make itself known. He forced himself to breathe, to steady the camera, to push forward. Backing down now would mean failure. At least, that was what he told himself. But, in truth, curiosity had already been replaced by something else, dread. The kind that coils around the spine and whispers that turning back is no longer an option. He left the common room and stepped deeper into the hostel. The corridor branched into smaller rooms, each one filled with debris. Rusted bed frames leaned against the walls, shattered glass glinted faintly under his light, and graffiti sprawled across the plaster in angry streaks. Some were names, some were crude drawings. But one message stopped him cold. Scrawled across an entire wall in thick black paint were the words, "It follows you home." The letters dripped downward, smeared as though written in haste, or by a trembling hand. He whispered the phrase aloud, his voice shaking. "It follows you home." He tried to laugh it off, but the sound came out strained, hollow. A sudden crash echoed from behind him, loud enough to rattle the floorboards. He whipped around, flashlight shaking. The corridor he had just walked down stood empty. Nothing moved, yet the sound had been too real, too close. He swallowed hard, his mouth dry, and turned back toward the writing on the wall. But something had changed. The paint, it was wet, shiny under the beam of his flashlight, as though it had been written only moments ago. His stomach dropped, a wave of nausea washing over him. He staggered back, nearly tripping over a broken frame on the ground. And then the whispers began again. Louder this time, faster. Not one voice, but many, overlapping in a chaotic hum that filled the corridor. He spun, light darting left and right, but the hall remained empty. The sound pressed in from every angle, tightening around his chest until he could barely breathe. He stumbled into the nearest room, slamming his back against the wall, trying to escape the voices. But they followed him inside, filling the small space until it felt suffocating. He pressed his hands against his ears, but the whispers were inside his head now, sharp and jagged, carrying words he didn't recognize. And then, all at once, silence. The abrupt cut was so sharp it left his ears ringing. He stood gasping, the beam of his flashlight darting across the small room. It fell on something in the corner. An old mattress lay collapsed against the wall. On it, gouged deep into the fabric, were scratches, dozens of them, some shallow, some deep, torn through to the springs. The marks weren't random, they formed letters, words. Slowly, his light traced across them, and his blood ran cold. "Get out." His breath caught. He raised the camera with trembling hands, filming the words as proof. But the longer he stared at them, the heavier the room felt. Like the message wasn't a warning left years ago, but something delivered directly to him now. Suddenly, a loud bang shook the room, the mattress jolting as if struck from behind. He staggered back, flashlight jerking wildly. The scratches seemed to deepen under his eyes, new grooves carving themselves into the torn fabric. His skin crawled, every nerve screaming at him to leave. But when he stumbled into the corridor again, he wasn't alone. At the far end stood a figure, tall, thin, motionless, its outline barely visible in the shadows, but enough to freeze him where he stood. He raised his flashlight, the beam landing directly on the shape. Nothing. The hall was empty. He lowered the light, his breath ragged. But when he glanced back at the wall where "It follows you home" had been written, the words were gone. Not smeared, not faded. Gone, as though they had never existed. His camera kept rolling, his hands shaking uncontrollably. He muttered to himself, I should go. I should leave. But even as he said it, he knew leaving wasn't simple. The hostel had its grip on him now, and with every step deeper inside, it tightened. The warning had been clear, get out, but something else in the building wanted the exact opposite. It wanted him to stay. The explorer gripped his flashlight so tightly his knuckles turned white, the metal slick with sweat. Every instinct screamed at him to turn back, to retrace his steps and run down the hill without looking behind. But the heavy silence of the hostel pressed in from all sides, a silence so unnatural it felt alive. His breathing sounded too loud in his own ears. Each exhale seemed swallowed whole by something waiting just beyond sight. He steadied the camera, forcing himself to continue forward down the long corridor. His beam flicked over cracked walls, broken doors hanging on rusted hinges, and stains that seemed to seep outward like old wounds. He tried to convince himself that he was just filming ruins, nothing more. But then the whispers began again, not faint this time. Louder, closer. Words in a language he couldn't recognize, but filled with an urgency that tightened around his skull. He swung the flashlight left, then right. Nothing. The hall was empty, yet the voices rose into overlapping chaos, 100 mouths speaking at once. His chest heaved as though the very air had thickened, turning each breath into a struggle. Then the flashlight flickered, once, twice, before cutting out completely. The sudden darkness smothered him, leaving only the mechanical whir of his camera recording blindly. He fumbled with the light, hitting the casing, shaking it violently, until the beam sputtered back to life. When it did, he froze. In the few seconds of darkness, the hallway had changed. The debris that had littered the ground was gone. The graffiti smeared across the walls had vanished. Instead, the corridor looked almost new. Clean white paint stretched unbroken down the length of the hall. Doors stood straight and polished, brass handles shining faintly. For a heartbeat, it looked as if he had stepped into the hostel decades earlier, when it still lived and breathed. His chest tightened. This wasn't possible. He stumbled forward, filming desperately, sweeping the light back and forth, and then the sound returned. Footsteps, dozens of them, pattering across the floor, above him, behind him, in front of him. Invisible people moving through the building, as if it were alive again. He spun, his flashlight jerking wildly, and that was when he saw them. Reflections, not solid figures, but faint silhouettes flickering in and out of existence as if made from smoke. Men, women, children, some standing in doorways, some passing through halls. None of them looked at him. They moved in their own silent world, as if unaware he was there. Yet the closer he looked, the more he realized their faces were wrong. Blurred, hollow, like masks carved without eyes. His legs nearly buckled. He pressed himself against the wall, whispering to the camera, "I shouldn't be here. I shouldn't." The words cut off. One of the figures had stopped, a tall, thin silhouette at the end of the hall. Unlike the others, it did not flicker. It stood still, solid, watching. The whispers cut to silence. The footsteps ceased. One by one, the other shapes melted away, leaving only that lone figure. His flashlight shook as he raised it, but when the beam reached the end of the corridor, the figure was gone. The sound that followed made his blood run cold. It came from directly behind him. Slow, deliberate footsteps, closing the distance. He spun, flashlight sweeping across the hall. Empty. Yet the sound continued. Another step. Another. As if something invisible was walking straight toward him. He stumbled backward, tripping over broken boards, nearly dropping his camera. His light darted wildly, catching glimpses of shifting shadow that didn't match his own. His breath came ragged, his chest tight. He whispered to himself, "I have to leave. I have to leave." But the hostel wasn't letting him. The walls groaned. A low, guttural creak echoed through the building, vibrating through the floorboards into his shoes. Dust cascaded from the ceiling in faint streams. And then came the smell. Acrid, sharp, like burning metal and rotting wood all at once. His stomach churned, bile rising in his throat. The whispers returned, but no longer distant. They hissed directly into his ear, curling around the back of his skull. Words he couldn't understand, but heavy with venom. He swatted at the air, as if trying to push away something unseen, but his hands struck only emptiness. The flashlight flickered again, and this time, when it steadied, the hallway had changed once more. The walls no longer looked fresh and clean. They were drenched in dark stains, dripping downward in long rivulets. The doors hung open, and from within each room came faint movements, figures, dozens of them, all standing in the shadows of their doorways, facing him silently. His mouth went dry, his chest tightened, and then he heard it, deep and guttural, rolling through the hostel like thunder. A voice, not whispering now, but booming, vibrating through the walls. Get out. The force of the words slammed into him, rattling his bones, making his vision blur. He staggered backward, ears ringing, camera shaking violently in his grip. But, before he could move another step, the tall figure appeared again. Not at the end of the hall this time, just a few feet ahead, blocking his way. For the first time, the explorer felt the weight of real fear, not curiosity. This wasn't a story to capture. This wasn't proof to take home. This was something ancient, violent, and alive, and it had chosen him. The angry spirit of Tanglin Hill Hostel had revealed itself, and it did not intend to let him leave so easily. The explorer's body trembled as he stumbled backward, the tall figure blocking the corridor like a wall of shadow. His flashlight beam wavered across it, but the light bent strangely around the figure, never landing squarely on its form. It was tall, impossibly thin, its shoulders crooked at unnatural angles. Though its face was shrouded in darkness, he felt its gaze pierce straight through him. The guttural voice reverberated through the hostel again, not booming this time, but low and venomous, curling around his mind like smoke. Get out. He staggered, clutching his camera to his chest, forcing himself to mutter into it. This isn't a story. This isn't. His words choked off as the shadow moved. It didn't step forward in any normal way. It slid, jerking closer with each blink, the distance closing between them without sound. Panic ripped through him. He spun, bolting down the hall, his boots crashing over debris. His flashlight bobbed wildly, casting fragments of light on peeling walls and shattered windows. The whispers erupted again, following him through the building, words he still couldn't understand. Only one repeated phrase stood out, clearer than the rest. It follows you home. He skidded to a stop, chest heaving. He had seen those words scrawled on the wall earlier, wet as if freshly painted. He had thought it was a cruel prank, graffiti left by other explorers. But now, as the whispers echoed them back to him, he realized the truth. The words weren't left by some long-gone vandal. They were a warning. And worse, they were a promise. Desperate, he ducked into another room. His flashlight cut across a collapsed ceiling, tangled beams jutting downward like broken ribs. The floor was thick with dust, undisturbed. Yet, in the far corner, scratched deep into the plaster, he saw markings. Lines, gouges, curves. He stepped closer, the beam steadying across the wall. His stomach dropped. The scratches formed words, not just random phrases, but full sentences etched with inhuman patience. Do not speak to it. Do not look at it. It will cling to you. It will not stop. The explorer's chest tightened. He realized that every sound he had responded to, the whispers, the footsteps, even the crashing noises, he had answered in some way. He had spoken aloud, he had asked questions, he had looked. He had already broken every rule. The air in the room thickened, heavy with pressure, as though the building itself was closing in. His flashlight sputtered, shadows writhing along the walls. And then the smell returned. Sharp, metallic, suffocating. His eyes watered as his stomach twisted. He stumbled toward the door, gagging, and that was when he heard it again. A whisper, different from the rest. Softer, closer. Not in a foreign tongue this time, but in broken English. Mine. His breath froze in his chest. The voice wasn't in the air, it was inside his ear, hot against his skin as though someone had leaned in to whisper directly to him. He spun, sweeping the light, but the room was empty. Empty except for the words carved into the wall. Words that seemed to glow faintly now, pulsing with a sickly sheen. It will cling to you. For the first time, the explorer understood the true danger. This wasn't about the hostel itself. The spirit didn't want him gone because he was trespassing. It wanted to leave with him. To follow him beyond these walls, beyond Tanglin Hill, into his life. The illness people spoke of, the nightmares, the streaks of bad luck, they weren't random consequences. They were signs of being marked, of carrying the spirit home like an unwanted guest. His camera whirred faintly in his hands, still recording. Proof. But what good was proof if it meant bringing something back with him? The figure appeared again in the doorway, tall and rigid, blocking his escape. Its form seemed clearer now, its limbs too long, its head tilting unnaturally as though its neck might snap. The whispers swelled around him, rising into a fevered chorus. His chest burned, his lungs straining for air. And then, all at once, silence. The figure stood motionless, its hollow presence filling the space. And, in the heavy quiet, he realized something that made his blood run cold. The hostel wasn't trying to keep him in. It was holding him long enough for the spirit to latch on completely. The warnings carved into the walls weren't from the entity, they were from others who had come before, who had realized too late what was happening. He stared at the words one last time, his pulse thundering in his ears. It will not stop. The explorer gripped his flashlight, his broken breath fogging in the cold air, and finally understood the truth. The angry spirit of Tanglin Hill didn't care if he left. Because once you had seen it, once you had heard it, once it had spoken to you, leaving didn't matter anymore. It was already coming with him. The explorer ran. He didn't think, didn't plan, didn't even breathe properly. He just bolted down the corridor, boots crunching glass and wood, the camera bouncing wildly in his grip. The figure's shadow stretched across the walls behind him, impossibly long, following with slow, deliberate steps that never seemed to grow louder but never fell behind either. He stumbled down the staircase, nearly pitching forward, his flashlight beam skittering across broken railings and peeling paint. The air pressed heavy around him, the smell of rot and metal clinging to his lungs. The whispers started again, faint at first, then rising into a violent chorus, 100 voices screaming over one another. He clutched his ears, but the sound drilled inside his skull, pushing him forward faster. At last, he burst through the doorway and out into the night air. The jungle sounds rushed back at once. The insects, the rustle of leaves, the distant call of birds. For a fleeting second, he thought it was over. He bent forward, gasping, his lungs aching with the weight of air that finally felt alive again. But then his camera, still running, crackled. Through the static, he heard it, a whisper. Softer now, but unmistakable. Mine. His hands shook violently as he killed the recording. He stuffed the camera into his bag, refusing to listen any longer, refusing to look back at the hulking shadow of the hostel at the top of the hill. He stumbled down the path, never slowing, never daring to stop. Locals later claimed they saw him leave Tanglin Hill that night, pale and drenched in sweat. Some say he never spoke of what happened inside. Others insist he tried, but that every time he did, strange accidents followed. Illness, breakdowns, shadows caught in the corner of his home recordings. The hostel still stands, its windows black and empty, waiting for the next curious soul. And the question remains, did the explorer ever really leave it behind? Because if the warnings carved into the walls were true, the angry spirit didn't stay on Tanglin Hill. It walked out with him. I hope you enjoyed these stories. If you liked them and want to listen to more, feel free to subscribe and put on your notifications. I upload almost every day. Wish you all the best.